Order. Ruth Jones to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Dowd, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, I think, for the first time. It's very good to see you in the chair. I'm delighted to be able to bring this debate before the House today, but I do want to start by acknowledging the seriousness of the situation in the Middle East and my hopes and those of my constituents for a more peaceful world and a real meaningful de-escalation in that area.
Hear, hear.
Mr Dowd, as we consider the impact of the Spring Budget 2024 on Wales and the Welsh economy, I want to acknowledge the voices, views and concerns of the people of Newport West. My constituents have shared their worries and their concerns with me since the Chancellor delivered his budget in recent weeks. Of course, I'm also thinking about people right across Wales dealing with the consequences of a Conservative government that is out of touch and out of time. The recent budget could and should have been a unique opportunity to unlock Wales's promise and to unlock all the potential that we see in and around our communities. But instead, it was more decline and decay. And it's clear to everyone here, and I suspect the Minister too, that this government has decided to continue papering over the cracks of almost 14 years of Conservative economic failure, rather than giving us the change we need. Mr Dowd, as we consider the impact of Budget 2024, we need to think about where we are thanks to this government. Every colleague here in this room will know that after 14 years of Conservative government, people in Newport West and Monmouth, in Clwyd East and Bridgend, and right across Wales, as well as the rest of the United Kingdom, are worse off. Families continue to struggle with the cost of living crisis, higher taxes and eye-watering energy bills. The list is depressing and it is long. Debt and interest rates are much higher. Britain's standing in the world is diminished. Economic growth is stagnant and our much-needed, much-valued and seriously underfunded public services are on their knees. Taxes are higher than at any time since the Second World War. Indeed, never has a British government asked its people in Wales and across the UK to pay so much for so little. Yeah. So let's take a moment to talk about the Tories' unfunded plans to abolish national insurance contributions and the Chancellor's promise of a £46 billion of unfunded tax cuts that would leave a gaping black hole in the public finances. This reckless approach exposes the clear risk of 5 more years of Conservatives. They will gamble with the public finances and working people will be forced to pay the price yet again. This Tory government clearly hasn't learned anything since the former Prime Minister, as we heard this morning during Prime Minister's questions, crashed the economy and sent people's mortgages spiralling. Yeah. I welcome the approach of the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor, who have been very clear that Labour will never play fast and loose with the nation's finances. Households in Wales will be £700 worse off under the Tory tax plan on average, giving 5 pence for every 10 pence being taken from the people across the country. I'm afraid that this budget confirms the UK has the highest tax burden in 70 years, rising every year of the forecast period. And the OBR figures speak for themselves and show for every 10p extra working people would pay in tax under the Tories' plan, they will only get 5p back as a result of the combined national insurance contribution cuts. That includes OBR's revised estimate for the impact of tax threshold freezes, that raised 41.1 billion over the forecast period, and will create 3.7 million new taxpayers by 2028-29. So as we go back to the people in this general election year, we will be closing the door on the worst Parliament for living standards on record, and it will be the only Parliament on record where living standards have fallen. It's important to remind the Minister, and I welcome her to her place today, that real pay has gone up by just £17 a week over 13 years of Conservative government. Yet in the last Labour government, wages rose by £183 a week over 13 years. The spring budget reveals that growth in GDP per capita is negative this year and has been downgraded in 4 years of the forecast period. The OBR confirmed what may be called Rishi's recession, with GDP per capita smaller than when our unelected Prime Minister moved into number 10, taking over from the Prime Minister who was beaten by a lettuce, as we remember. The Conservatives have wrecked the public finances. Debt has almost tripled under the Conservatives from 1 trillion to just under 2.6 trillion, and borrowing has been revised up in the next 5 years of the forecast period. This is the legacy of 13 years handed down to the people of Wales. Mr Dowd, you will not be surprised to hear me note that this isn't just about the impact on Wales as part of our United Kingdom. The government has presided over the biggest drop in living standards in Wales since records began, and that goes for England, Scotland and Northern Ireland too. And that will obviously have a huge impact on the economy in our part of the United Kingdom, but also right across it. In recent months, more than 7,000 homeowners across Wales have faced a Tory mortgage bombshell as their fixed-term mortgage rates have come to an end. The average estimated hike is approximately £240 per month. That is the real cost of the Conservative Party. Under this Prime Minister, the Conservatives don't have a plan for our future. They crashed the economy and now expect working people to pay the price. Our country needs change, and that's why I'm proud that the defining purpose of the next Labour government, if we are fortunate enough to win the trust and support of the people across Wales and our United Kingdom, will be growing Britain's economy so that we can invest in our future. Indeed, Chair, Labour's plan for growth is about making working people better off, about boosting the Welsh economy and moving our country forward. So we will be putting economic stability first by introducing a new fiscal lock to bring economic security back to family finances. We will back British business. And importantly for me as a former president of the Wales TUC, Labour will make work pay. The impact of Budget 2024 on the Welsh economy also shows how important it is that colleagues of mine standing for Labour across Wales are elected to this place. Many of them are strong Welsh women like Becky Gittins in Clwyd East, my neighbour Catherine Fuchs in Monmouthshire, a constituency that I know very well indeed, and Jackie Jones over in West Wales. They stand alongside colleagues like the Shadow Secretary of State in Cardiff Central, my neighbour and friend, the member for Newport East in front of me here, my colleagues from Gower, Pontypridd, and the Honourable Member from Swansea East, and of course Llanelli. Their re-election to this place will help ensure that better days lie ahead and that any future budget under a Labour government will have significantly better impact on Wales and our economy than Budget 2024. Mr Dowd, I would like to raise several specific questions directly with the Minister because figures from Citizens Advice Cymru show the number of people in Wales who are unable to top up their prepayment meters has increased 36 times since the last general election. So can the Minister tell us how many households in Wales still have prepayment meters and whether any have been forcibly installed since the ban in February 2023? I appreciate she may not have the figures to hand, so perhaps she may be able to write to me on that. And also we know that a recent Which survey found that 1 in 5 working-age parents in Wales are skipping meals due to high food prices. Has the Minister had any recent conversations with supermarkets in Wales about keeping the cost of food down? And again, this year, 62,000 homeowners in Wales will face a Tory mortgage bombshell with their fixed-term rates expiring. So Labour government would require banks to protect homeowners. So what is the Minister doing to help owners with the bills caused by her party's disastrous economic mismanagement? The Conservatives have crippled working people with the highest tax burden since the Second World War, with the Prime Minister's latest gimmick meaning British people to pay £10 in tax get just £5 back. So does the Minister agree with Iceland boss Richard Walker that Labour is now the right choice for his customers? So as I draw my remarks to a close, you'll be pleased to hear, Mr Dowd, it will be no surprise that in my view, the only way, the best way, is to change course, to deliver for our people and to move forward with a Labour government. And the sooner, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil Griffith.
Mr Dowd. Well, I'm afraid the Conservative spring budget was a real smoke and mirrors affair, and people in the Llanelli constituency are not taken in by it. The Prime Minister, and indeed the Minister, may boast that they have cut the rate of national insurance, but people in the Llanelli constituency know that you do not get something for nothing. They feel worse off, and that's because they are worse off. We've had the biggest fall in living standards in our history, with the UK economy remaining stagnant, with the latest ONS figures showing that GDP per person has fallen in each of the last 7 quarters, the longest period of stagnation since the 1950s. People in Llanelli and across the UK are worse off under the Conservative government. They're now bearing the burden of the highest tax burden in 70 years, and for every 5 pence the Conservative government's given back in tax, it has in fact taken away 10 pence. People have pointed out to me that they've been hit by the freezing of the tax threshold. The freezing of the tax threshold means that as their incomes have increased over the past few years, but never enough, of course, to keep up with the rampant inflation that this Conservative government has presided over, they're finding that they're reaching the tax threshold for the first time, or that more of their income is now subject to tax. The freezing of the basic threshold has brought 3.7 million more people across the UK into paying tax, and more taxpayers are squeezed by now having to pay the higher rate of tax as more of their income is in that bracket, often because of a pay rise that's not even kept pace with inflation. So there's a double whammy of more tax and less purchasing power. Then we've seen another sneaky trick, the devolution of the increasing cost of the burden of public services to Welsh Government and local councils. As we know, a large portion of what councils spend on local services comes from central government, UK government taxation, to which of course we all contribute, whether it's allocated directly to councils in England or via Welsh Government to councils in Wales. So as the Conservative government has squeezed and squeezed the Welsh budget, with the latest Welsh Government settlement some £3 billion less than if it had grown with GDP since 2010, meaning that Welsh Government has had to pass on swinging Conservative cuts to Welsh councils, local councils in Wales are faced with a difficult balancing act of having either to cut services or to raise council tax. And this is a time when councils, just like householders, are facing huge inflation in their costs.
Will my Honourable friend give way?
Indeed,
I'm grateful for my Honourable friend giving way. She's making a really powerful point about the cost burden onto local councils. My own local council of Rhondda and Taff is faced with some of these burdens, and we've also got the extra burden of having to fund the remedial work of the coal tip safety in Wales, a legacy which predates devolution. We've had hundreds of years of mining in Wales. That should be the responsibility of the UK government, but they are failing to take responsibility of these costs, Mr Dowd. And this cost shouldn't be borne by my constituents when it was the UK that benefited from the coal mining industry of South Wales.
Well, indeed, my friend is absolutely right to bring that point up, and it's something that we have been raising, and I do hope the Minister, who does in fact have some former minds in her own constituency, will take this message back to her colleagues. So, as I was saying, we're seeing the councils having to make very difficult decisions. In fact, councils are having both to cut services and to raise council tax. But make no mistake, these cuts in services and rises in council tax are a direct result of the way in which central government has squeezed the Welsh budget. But it leaves people in Wales paying more for poorer services. Not only is the Welsh Government budget for the 2024-2025 some £3 billion lower than if it had grown in line with GDP since 2010, but it is actually some £700 million lower in real terms than expected at the time of the 2021 spending review, which of course means having to manage even more cuts than expected. Now, the Minister may point out the Welsh Government will receive an additional £168 million resource funding for 24-25, but this is a result of spending decisions made in England and relates to funding for NHS pay and local government adult social care, which have already been factored into Welsh Government spending plans. People in Wales are still seeing costs rising. Although inflation may have slowed, there's still inflation, which means that prices are still rising. And these rises are to essential household costs like food, which are leaving people really struggling. Then some 62,000 homeowners in Wales are facing a mortgage bombshell as fixed-term agreements come to an end because of the totally irresponsible mini-budget that the Tories pushed through collectively in the autumn of 2022 when the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk was Prime Minister, sending interest rates soaring. That will leave homeowners having to find hundreds of additional pounds year on year to cover their mortgage interest. And of course, that has a knock-on effect on rents as well, with increasing numbers of people finding their rent simply unaffordable. People in Wales are also facing higher energy bills, and the government's failure to roll out renewables more quickly has made that all the worse, losing yet more precious time in the race to bring down bills and combat climate change, with the fiasco last year when the government's handling of the bidding process meant that no proposals for floating offshore wind projects came forward. And there is no help for the least well-off. The Conservative government have been squeezing household incomes for 14 years. Back in 2011, the Tories increased VAT to 20%, putting up household bills, which particularly hits the poorest. In an unprecedented move, they also broke the historic link between benefits and inflation, and they've cut benefits paid to the least well-off in society, many of whom are, of course, in work, leaving many without enough to live on, not even enough to cover their essential costs. It's shocking that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Trussell Trust have had to call for the implementation of an essentials guarantee to ensure those in receipt of universal credit are able to meet their essential costs. Benefits should always cover essential costs. Yes. In terms of regeneration, the replacement of the European structural funds, it's very disappointing that the UK government has rowed back on devolution and has cut the Welsh government out of the consultation on the way that these should be used and managed. The result is a tendency for the money to go to one-off projects in specific geographical areas, rather than looking at the real levers which will drive up GDP and prosperity, such as apprenticeships and skills training. What worries me in particular, there's little in this budget to suggest the UK government is serious about growth. Every Conservative budget since 2014 has promised higher wages, higher skills or higher growth. But a year on from the so-called budget for growth, the economy has actually shrunk, as have wages. Now, we have some world-class manufacturing in Llanelli, Tata Steel, car component companies like Gestamp, engineering firms which supply companies like Aston Martin, and so on. But the international competition for business and investment is fierce. The lack of a UK government industrial strategy makes it difficult for us to compete with other geographical locations abroad for investment, whether that's because of cheaper energy costs in our neighbouring European countries or the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, where we are now seeing growth forecast to be twice that of any other country in the G7. Yet the government is investing £500 million for an electric arc furnace in Port Talbot, but there's been no attempt by this government to encourage investment in the technologies needed for green primary steel production. We see Tata investing in such facilities at our competitor plant at Imoyden in the Netherlands, and I understand that one of the reasons for not bringing that investment to Wales is our high energy costs, something that we've been warning this government for years and years. Now, Labour has pledged to invest £3 billion to secure green primary steel making here in the UK, as well as a National Wealth Fund, bringing public and private funding together to invest in the green industries of the future, thus creating quality jobs as well as tackling climate change. People in Llanelli and across Wales are desperate for change and desperate for hope of a better life. That's why we need a Labour government who will slash energy bills for households and industry, invest in the new green technologies of the future, and invest £3 billion to ensure that we develop primary green steelmaking here in Wales. And the sooner, the better.
And I congratulate the member for Newport West on securing this debate as well. The government has tried to spin the budget as the deliverer of long-term growth for Wales, but people's response is at odds with the spin, and their lack of faith in the government's rhetoric is rooted in what they experience day in, day out, and how little faith they now have in attention-seeking announcements. The real story is one of stagnating living standards, higher taxes on poorer people, and cuts to public services on top of years of austerity, of food banks providing meals to working families. The budget's headline announcement of a 2p cut in national insurance plays out, of course, in different ways in different places. London will benefit the most at £621 on average, while wage earners in Wales are only getting slightly more than £1 a day, £380 on average. And this matters. This isn't a matter of begrudging these gains for some people in some communities, but what needs to be called out is the disregard for how the national insurance cuts as a policy will entrench inequality in different parts of the United Kingdom. There is nothing in the spring budget to address the deep economic challenges facing Wales, such as flagging productivity. In Wales, gross value added per hour worked out as 84% of the UK. This is the lowest productivity of any of the 4 UK nations, although it varies within Wales, and of course it varies within the English Midlands as well. This plays out in different places in different ways. But these indicators also reveal how little effect that worthy, very familiar, perhaps misused 2019 election slogan, that of levelling up, has actually had. Now, I know the Tories will delight in telling us that Wales has had more than our per head of population share of levelling up since then. I will.
On the Tories telling us, we've never had it so good, and Wales is benefiting. Would the member join me in being disappointed that, apart from the Minister who's compelled to be here, who I have a lot of respect for, there isn't a single Welsh Conservative MP in this debate, which shows how much contempt and disregard they show for the people of Wales?
They must be content with the crumbs that we get from the table with levelling up, frankly. But what I would ask, is that per head of population distribution really a good measure of success? Under the European funding schemes, of course, Wales also got the highest per head of population contribution for a reason, and the reason was recognised deprivation, proven need. How has the Tory levelling up agenda grasped the challenge of replacing European money previously distributed specifically to lift the poorest communities out of poverty? OK, I'll tell you, Mr Chairman, how it's done this. It's done this by invoking the UK Internal Market Act to undermine the Senedd and to any pretence at strategic working. It's done it by setting cash-strapped local authorities in direct competition with each other, like supplicants begging for pennies. It's done it by providing money without sufficient time even to use it to best effect. And it's done it by ensuring that there is scant, effective evaluation of money used, so we don't even know whether it's levelling anything up for anybody. But of course, that isn't the point. Levelling up was never about making sure that Wales got not a penny less than previously under European funds. We know we're getting £1.3 billion less. Levelling up has become a byword for cynical short-termism, lollipops for a government to hand out with an eye to the next election, pork barrel politics. This is clear to see when the budget included Canary Wharf in the 242 million of London levelling up cash. Canary Wharf, of all places, hardly somewhere that needs further investment, further levelling up when compared to other places in the UK. The Chancellor announced departmental spending cuts of up to 20 billion in the spring budget. Let's be clear that these cuts will make a wasteland of our public services, and that in a country, our country Wales, where we place a high value on how a community works for everyone. I fear for the future of Welsh public services. We've already seen Welsh Government's refusal to step in to defend cuts to Wales's National Museum. Rather, and I pity this, I'm sad about this, than demonstrating the political courage to protect our cultural institutions, First Minister Vaughan Gething tells us to wait patiently for a future Labour Chancellor to start properly funding Wales. I fear he is referring to the same Shadow Chancellor who drops heavy hints that Labour will go ahead with public spending cuts if they form the next government. My party believes that the people of Wales should have the ability to grasp the means to build our own economic destiny. Why shouldn't we take control of our natural resources through the devolution of the Crown Estate? Why shouldn't we create a funding system that addresses our needs and makes best use of our fair share of money from HS2 and other projects? And to close, Mr Chair, after COVID and the face of the future of global unrest and accelerated climate change, the Chancellor should have prioritised long-term investment in our public services, in infrastructure and in communities. Yet the budget and its aftermath seem to have produced a consensus for spending cuts between both Tories and Labour, with the Institute for Fiscal Studies calling support for spending cuts a conspiracy of silence between the two main parties. The message should come loud and clear, as things stand, Wales gets crumbs from the table, and we can do so much better than this.
Thank you. Jess Morden.
Thank you very much, Mr Dowd. And can I congratulate my honourable friend and neighbour for securing this very important debate today. In fact, it's the second year running, I believe, that you've secured this debate, yes? The honourable member has. And she, as always, made her points very well, as did all the speakers that we've had so far. And can I echo her comments about Gaza and the Middle East? But both of us share the city of Newport, and I know it is a matter of great concern. And as my honourable friend and neighbour set out, this is a government clinging on to power, having presided over 14 years of managed decline, lacking the interest, the vision and the appetite to deliver the fundamental change that our country needs. We've had some excellent contributions, as I've said, from members today who will have had that direct feedback from their constituents, be it on their doorsteps in places like Monmouth and their surgeries, and certainly I have done over the Easter recess through a cost of living survey that we that we carried out in Newport East, and this feedback, people are very strongly telling us just how held back they feel by this failing Tory government. I thought the Honourable Member for Newport West put it well when she said never has a British government asked its people to pay so much for so little. Having played fast and loose with the public finances, the party opposite are passing on the cost of their incompetence to those who can least afford it, just as public services, those public services which so many of them are relying on, are crumbling under the weight of their cuts. And the Honourable Member for Llanelli is quite right. This is smoke and mirrors, this spring budget, and people aren't taken in by it. Let's take ourselves back to 2019 for a moment, when those on the benches opposite stood on manifesto commitments not to raise taxes, to reduce debt, to reduce poverty, and to help people with cost of living pressures. 3 Prime Ministers and 5 Chancellors later, and with the Tory chaos almost halving the government's parliamentary majority, those promises lie in tatters. As honourable members have said already today in this debate, despite cuts to national insurance, which we support, the income tax threshold freezes mean that taxes are rising at a record pace, now a 70-year high, and rising each year of the spring budget's forecast period. This will make households in Wales £700 worth off, as the Honourable Member for Newport West said. And I was very struck by a constituent I met in Mega on Saturday on the issue of income tax threshold freezes, which was raised by the Honourable Member for Llanelli, who described to me how her small monthly pension was hit by those the impact on the tax upon it, and how unfair that was. The UK, I will give way.
And of course, I'm sure my honourable friend will mention, which I forgot to mention, that pensioners don't pay NI, so they've had no benefit whatsoever from that cut.
I thank the Honourable Member for Llanelli for making that point, which is a very pertinent point to make and does have a big impact on pensioners, as she said. The UK debt to GDP ratio is at its highest level in 70 years, with no sign of falling. The number of people living in absolute poverty is expected to increase this year to 12 million, and 4.2 million children living in poverty. 62,000 householders in Wales this year will face the Tory mortgage bombshell, as honourable members have mentioned, as their fixed-term rates expire, with the average home expected to face a homeowner expected to face a £240 hike in their monthly bill. And, as other honourable members have said, this is the first Parliament on record by the end of which living standards are set to be lower than they were at the beginning. Breaking promises and breaking records, all to the detriment of Welsh people struggling to make ends meet. And the Prime Minister has joined his predecessor in backing the sort of enormous and entirely unfunded tax cuts that led to the swift demise of her premiership, this time in the form of the abolition of national insurance. Perhaps the Minister would explain to us today, because the Prime Minister couldn't repeatedly fail to answer the question at PMQs today, perhaps the Minister would explain to us in this debate what they will cut to find the £46 billion needed every year for their new policy, or whether they plan to extend their tax rating record by piling further costs on Welsh working people. Not only has this tired Tory government lost any semblance of economic competence, driving down business confidence too, it's also lost its moral compass too. Over the last few days, my constituents Colin and Janet Smith have been sharing with the media the story of their decades-long fight for justice for their son Colin, who tragically died aged 7 years old, having contracted AIDS and hepatitis C from contaminated blood administered by the NHS. For years after his death, they faced bullying, abuse and the loss of employment due to the stigma surrounding his illnesses. And knowing the family very well, the absolute tragedy of what he was put through. Members across this House will know that their story is not unique. They have campaigned tirelessly alongside so many others for the truth and for just compensation. So I'd really like the Minister to tell us why, despite the final recommendations on compensation having been delivered to Sir Brian Brian Langstaff and by Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair of the inquiry, to ministers more than a year ago when he said they could get on with paying the compensation payments. There's not a single word about this in the spring budget. I think it's an absolute disgrace. Welsh steelworkers are also right to feel betrayed by this government, willing to countenance 3,000 redundancies across South Wales while our European steelmaking competitors make historic investments in green steel. The almost overnight end to our virgin steelmaking capability in Port Talbot is not an inevitability. Rather than rely on imports from across the world, exposing us to the same global risks that precipitated the energy crisis, ministers must revisit the multi-union plan described by Charter itself as being credible to work with our steelworkers towards a just transition to a greener future for the steel we all want. As the Honourable Member for Llanelli raised, on this side of the House, we would invest £3 billion in green steel within the first term of the Labour government in Westminster, protecting livelihoods and the future of our sovereign British steel manufacturer, which is vital for our plan to make Britain a clean energy superpower by doubling onshore wind, tripling solar and quadrupling offshore wind. It's not too late for the government to change direction on this, and it would be particularly important for my honourable friend for Newport West to us in Newport with Llanwern Steelworks, and it would not be the first time a Conservative press release has sounded suspiciously familiar to Labour colleagues, whether it's the narrowing of the non-dom tax loophole or the half-hearted levy on oil and gas giants. The Prime Minister appears to be slowly realising that the path to a fairer, brighter future for Wales and for Britain is through the progressive policies of a Welsh Labour government working with the Labour government in Westminster. And the consequential funding that will flow from a UK Labour government to Welsh public services will be critical, and it's very important that the Honourable Member for Pontypridd also mentioned the cost burden on local government too, but our public services, which face intense challenges, particularly in the context of the value of the Welsh Government's budget having dropped by 1.3 billion in real terms as a result of the Tories' economic mismanagement. There was, however, some progress to be welcomed from the spring budget. On this side, we've been repeatedly calling on the government to get a move on with the new nuclear site at Wilver. The purchase of the site is therefore good news, but we're still nowhere near seeing the prospect of clean energy and those thousands of good jobs returning to Anglesey. Had they not dithered for 5 years, we could have seen the plant 50% complete with up to 8,500 construction jobs underway, with around 900 permanent jobs to follow and 400 million for the local economy in wages. What we did see, though, in the spring budget was a Conservative government without a proper plan to grow the economy, without an industrial strategy to match the ambition of our talented Welsh workforce, and without the appetite for investment in a greener Wales. These will only be achieved with a UK Labour government working with a Welsh Labour government and a Secretary of State for Wales that stands up for the interests of Welsh people.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Dowd. It's lovely to see you in the chair this afternoon. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady for Newport West on securing this afternoon's debate, and thank all Honourable and Right Honourable members for taking part. The Honourable Lady knows, I hope, that I have great affection for her. We have been on the opposite side of many a bill committee over the last few years, and while we have often disagreed, we have always, I think, had fun doing so. So it is a pleasure to respond to her debate this afternoon. I did very much enjoy the Honourable Lady's speech, and I will refer to it throughout my contribution, but my favourite bit, I think, was the love letter to Labour women standing in marginal seats across Wales, which I thought was charming, if transparent. But I do want to congratulate all honourable members who've taken part in this afternoon's debate, who all happen to be women. And I think it shows what can be done when women get together and have a constructive, positive... Welsh women, indeed, I'm reminded. It shows what Welsh women can do when we get together. But turning to the matter at hand, Mr Dowd, it is absolutely clear that this Conservative government has a plan to deliver the long-term change that our country needs, and that plan is working. We have seen yet again today that inflation has fallen by over half its recent peak. The cost of living pressure is easing, and economic growth is more resilient than previously suggested. debt is also forecasted to fall. But the recovery is not over yet, and it is at risk by other political parties that do not have a plan for the economy, but are instead making unfunded promises that will take us back to square one. With the economy now turning a corner, the Chancellor has been able to make further tax cuts responsibly to boost growth across Wales and the UK by ensuring that working people keep more of their hard-earned money. Thanks to announcements made at both the autumn statement and the spring budget, we have now seen national insurance cuts benefit 1.2 million workers in Wales. I'll briefly give way.
People do in fact give a lot of money to the better off, and therefore they're a very, very blunt way of giving help to people and not at all targeted.
Minister.
The lady will not be surprised to know that I don't agree with that. At the end, and I would point her to the fact that at the end of 2010, a worker earning a wage of £15,000 was paying around £1,700 in taxation. Today, after 14 years of a Conservative government, that amount is around £500. And I think that shows that a Conservative party will deliver for working people. As I say, with the economy, thanks to announcements made at both the autumn statement and the spring budget, we have seen national insurance cuts of around £701. We saw further tax cuts announced, including the freezing of fuel duty for yet another year, further easing cost of living pressures, and saving the average car owner around £50 over a year. That is the 14th time, I believe, since the Conservatives came to power in 2010, that we have frozen fuel duty. Alcohol duty has also been frozen, once again, to support Wales's crucial hospitality industry. There was great news for Welsh SMEs, with the UK government raising the VAT registration threshold to £90,000. This builds on last year's autumn statement announcement that the UK government is backing Welsh business through the British Business Bank's £130 million investment fund for Wales. And just to remind Labour members opposite, as I have listened to a lengthy list of complaints about the Conservative government, I would remind Labour members opposite that whilst we are backing Welsh businesses, their own government, their own colleagues in Cardiff Bay has slashed business rate relief from 75% to 40%, meaning that hospitality businesses in Wales will pay thousands more in comparison to their colleagues in England. The spring budget also outlined the UK government's commitment to securing a diverse energy system, with Wales at its heart, through the decision to purchase the Wilfer Newydd site on Ynys Môn, and I welcome the Shadow Minister's rather muted celebration of that announcement. New nuclear developments have the potential to transform the North Wales economy, creating thousands of jobs whilst contributing to our net zero and energy security ambitions. Beyond nuclear, the renewable energy sector is also flourishing in Wales. The government is supporting floating offshore wind by securing a long-term pipeline of projects in the Celtic Sea and unlocking port infrastructure investment through the £160 million floating offshore wind manufacturing investment system. The Chancellor has also announced that the Crown Estate will bring forward an additional 12 gigawatts of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea in the 2030s. The budget was also a great moment for the creative industries, a sector which is hugely important to Wales's economy. And mindful how many members represent South Wales, I'm surprised this was not mentioned. Cardiff now is one of the UK's largest media production centres outside of London. I was thrilled then to see that the UK government continues to back the creative sectors in Wales with £500 million of new tax reliefs for the UK industry. And a cause close to my own heart, a further £5 million for the agri-food industry in Mid and North Wales, supporting research and development in our rural heartlands, helping to develop a more sustainable future for our vital agriculture sector. And again, this stands in stark contrast to the actions of the Welsh Labour government, who have cut the rural affairs budget by 37... I won't give way, no. Indeed, this government is working hard to ensure that Wales's sector strengths are empowered to move to the next level. This is why, at the autumn statement, we confirmed that there will be 2 investment zones in Wales. One located across Cardiff and Newport, again, a surprising admission from the speeches of 2 members from Newport, and a second investment zone located across Wrexham and Flintshire. The Chancellor then confirmed at spring budget that the programme has been extended in Wales from 5 to 10 years, with each receiving £160 million in funding over this period. This will supercharge key sectors across both locations, creating jobs, delivering growth and prosperity across Wales. A determination to create new jobs has also been spearheaded by Wales's Free Ports programme, and here I will praise, the Honourable Lady will be surprised to hear me say this, here I will praise the Welsh Government for working hand in hand with the UK Government on this. The Free Ports programme was further supported, once again at this budget, by the Chancellor when he announced that there would be an extension in tax relief from 5 to 10 years, providing greater certainty to businesses looking to invest, delivering growth and jobs and levelling up the economy. And a point that I think was raised by a number of honourable members in this afternoon's debate. The Chancellor's Spring Budget has provided Wales with substantial additional funding. Back in 2021, a record-breaking £18 billion block grant was secured at the spending review. This year's budget announced almost £170 million of additional funding through the Barnett formula for 2024-2025. This is on top of the £820 million already provided to the Welsh Government since that record-breaking grant in 2021, blowing away Labour and Plaid Cymru's argument that Wales has been underfunded. This is almost an extra £1 billion in additional funding for the Welsh Government. On top of this record funding, the Prime Minister recently announced £60 million for apprenticeships in England. That will result in yet more money for the Welsh Government. So, Mr Dowd, despite the negativity of members opposite, there is no doubt that the Welsh Government is adequately funded to deliver on its responsibilities. And it is a question of priorities, Mr Chairman. While this Conservative Government is pouring billions of pounds into Wales and turbocharging the Welsh economy, it's the decisions of the Welsh Labour Government, propped up by Plaid Cymru, who are undercutting Welsh public services. And so finally, during the debate, Mr Dowd, I was very disappointed by the negative and miserable tone taken by honourable members opposite in relation to levelling up funding in Wales. I was surprised to see them criticise the record amounts of funding that have been received in their own local authority. Announcement at the budget added to our commitment of long-term regeneration and growth in Wales. I'm thrilled then that Rhyl is the latest of 5 Welsh towns to benefit from £20 million each as part of the long-term plan for towns. I will give way.
Who will be responsible if public money is not spent on levelling up because it was provided late to Welsh local authorities by the UK Government?
Minister.
Well, I can assure her that Gwynedd County Council, her local council, will be responsible for the almost £19 million that was received in the Levelling Up Round 2. So I think there is great accountability there. And I think if you talk to, Mr Dowd, I think if you talk to local authority leaders across Wales, they are delighted by the extra support that the UK Government is giving them, which is amounting to around £440 million over the 3 Levelling Up Fund rounds. From the Muni Arts Centre in Pontypridd, the Old College on Aberystwyth Seafront, the Porthcawl Pavilion, the Pont Cysyllta Aqueduct. I've lived in Wales all my life and I can never say this. Pont Cysyllta Aqueduct. Nearly, I will work on that one. And new developments too, from a new leisure centre in Caerphilly to the development of Cardiff Crossrail to walkways and cycle paths in the Vale of Neath. Our places across Wales are changing for the better. And this work is all building on the foundation being laid across our regions by Wales's city and growth deals, with £790 million invested in all 4 of our regional economies. The UK Government is backing the Welsh economy and delivering the needs of the people and businesses and communities in Wales. During this afternoon's debate, the Shadow Minister and indeed the Honourable Lady who led the debate challenged me a number of times on an unfunded tax cut, which I heard it mentioned many times at Prime Minister's questions this morning. I understand that the Labour Party's new argument now is that the UK Government has promised to abolish national insurance tax. I'm curious as to where that has come from. No such promise has ever been made. No policy has ever been announced. I heard the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, make that claim earlier on, and I would be very worried that he could be accused of misleading the House, something I know he would never do. But this is Labour's smokescreen, covering up for the fact that Labour have no plan. The long and the short of it, Mr Chairman, is that this government has an excellent record to show for itself in Wales, and this spring budget only boosts that even further. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Jones to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Dowd. It's good to be able to wind up and to have a little bit of time before votes. And I do want to thank honourable members who are here today. And it is interesting, it's a women's debate today, because obviously women get things done, don't we?
Yeah.
So that's fine. But I want to thank the honourable member for Llanelli and the honourable member for Dwyfor Meirion, and obviously my neighbour, from Newport East, who is the Shadow Minister. It's great to have you all here to support it today. And obviously the Honourable Member for Pontypridd for her interventions. I think the Minister, it was great to have her in her seat. I just would like to be able to live in her world, because it seems to be a parallel universe to the one that we are living in Wales. Because when we're knocking on doors every week, the questions we are asking, do you feel better or worse off? And the most emphatic answer is, we are much worse off now than we were even a year ago. So I think that's something maybe she needs to take back to her government. Because, you know, we're here again, as the Honourable Member for Newport East reminded me, that we did this a year ago, and not only have things not got better, they've got worse in Wales. So I think we need to be clear on that. And I think the questions I asked the Minister about the prepayment meters and supermarkets and things, if she could perhaps write to me, that would be really, really helpful. But I do want to thank...
She is absolutely right to point out that I'm remiss in not responding to that, and I certainly will write to her. And if I may, Mr. Chair, I neglected to respond to the Shadow Minister when she raised the courageous constituents that she represents, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who have been vocal in campaigning for their son. And I just wanted to reiterate that the government will publish the findings of the inquiry later this month, and I will work with her to make sure her constituents get the answers they need.
And I'm grateful for that intervention and for clarifying, but as my honourable friend says, you don't have to wait, you can get on with it now. The smoke and mirrors in this budget was quite clear, and the Welsh people are paying more and getting less. So all I would say in conclusion, Mr Dowd, is bring on the general election and let's show what difference we can make. Thank you.
People speak.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of the Spring Budget 2024 on the Welsh economy. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The meeting session is suspended till 4 p.m. Order.